Session of the day. I'm sure all of you feel that we have had a long day, had been really busy, but then truly enriched by each other's sharings, enriched by these interdisciplinary conversations that we have had. And now we are going to spend 1 hour in this session. Our moderator is Professor Richard Fox Young. And as you would see on the screen, the 5 secretaries of the groups would join him on the podium. So I welcome them all. Victor Ferrer, Paul Appasamy, Baugus Lakshana, George Evers, Sakai Chan. Kindly come forward and take your seats. Each secretary is given 5 minutes. After 3 minutes, the timekeeper, I would request the secretaries to have a look at the timekeeper. The timekeeper would show that 2 minutes left. After 5 minutes, you would say, it is time. So in that way, 20 minutes of presentation of reports. If any member feels that there is an important point left out, don't worry, remaining the 35 minutes when the floor is open to everyone here from the audience, we can add them. And our moderator would guide us towards through the general discussion during those 35 minutes. So first, 25 minutes of presentation of reports.
Does this help? Yes. Good, okay. We'll have to move along expeditiously to finish on time and to give ample opportunity to you, the audience, to field some questions or make comments. My impression of the previous sessions was that they were very well moderated, but the moderators also made their own presentations. And so I'm bound and determined not to do that. We'll see how well I can resist the temptation. We have as much as 5 minutes. Maybe it would be better if it were kept to around 3 to summarize some very complex and rich conversations that have happened in the various small groups 3 times already today. And our first secretary is Victor.
Thank you. I'm happy to represent the group 1. We are looking at the questions from public life standpoint. So you can understand that we are from that standpoint. While we discuss the very first question, how has Christianity affected the formation of cultural and social movements in Asia? We had time to discuss around 6 issues: conversion, mediation of modernity and consolidation of democracy, contribution to ecological movements, resistance through mimesis, living with ethnocentric majoritarianism, and intra-ecclesial dialogue. This is what we discussed. Now, a lot of time was spent on discussing conversion because it has become a public issue in Asia, and especially in India. Now, conversion presupposes freedom of religion, as we know, and this freedom of religion was understood as right to profess and propagate one's faith. And now a new addition is done, a nuance is given, freedom to protect your own faith. And that's the reason freedom of religion is like having 3 things: to profess, to propagate, and protect. And therefore others are resisting conversions and they want to protect their faith. Conversion also is an interrogation of the tradition or religion from where one comes. One leaves behind a tradition and therefore and embraces another one. So it interrogates that tradition which one leaves. Conversion, particularly in the 19th century, in India especially, became a movement of social movement of liberation where people forged new identities and resisted and interrogated received and imposed identities. So conversion certainly brought social upliftment and transformation among the downtrodden and the tribals. Conversion is also viewed as a social threat. The convert is often ostracized and denied social integration, social benefits, and rendered to bare life, what George Agamben would say, a kind of bare life is given to the convert. Conversion is, as I said, is a very public issue, but at the same time it is a Christian issue. It has a Christian trace over it. Whenever we talk about conversion, it becomes conversion to Christianity. Conversion of the, and it hides many other kinds of conversions, like conversions of, or what we call Aryanization of the tribals, or the Gar Vapasi movements that are held by RSS and others. And so, you know, this dimension often is a smoke screen, and often opposition to conversion comes from work that is done to people regarding their empowerment, education, and social mobility. So to deny people these benefits, sometimes conversion is being raked. Conversion has become an issue of identity politics and is used as capital by politicians. Antagonism to conversion has links with the modes of production and forms of capitalism. It is raked up to divert our attention while the power elite controls the resources that belongs to the people. The second point, mediation of modernity and consolidation of democracy. We always thought Christianity mediated democracy and modernity to India. Today it is looked upon with suspicion. It is viewed as pseudo-secularization and even denationalization. And a reactive revivalist movement of Brahminical culture is sought in its place. The same may be true in other places, others were agreeing. Christianity has given alternative symbolic system to the people of Asia.
Victor, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay. Contribution to ecological movements. Stewardship model is very Christian, yet so-called Christian nations are very guilty of its destruction. I mean, it is being said that the Western Christian model nations are not a good models for us for an ecological movement that we want to develop here. Contestation through mimesis. This is come because of the presentation of Fernando in Sri Lanka was being that the Buddhists are becoming more and more like Christians. They are modeling our models and all that. So it is mimesis, imitating consciously or unconsciously Christian forms and modes, and by doing that they want to mark their difference and resist by imitating. This is what Irigare says. The women can become like man in order to resist man. Living with ethnocentric majoritarianism. In India, Christians are constantly reminded that they are not being Indian enough. So there is a constant reminder every time we are not Indian enough. Intra-ecclesial dialogue. The last point was concerning us from within. We need to dialogue conversion from within. We need a conversion from within to address issues of women, those who are silenced and oppressed, the plight of the lay people, caste divisions in the church, dowry systems, excessive clericalism. This was about the first discussion that we did. Now the second discussion, again, we are taking from the public life point of view.
But Victor, you only have just half a minute or so, I'm afraid.
Oh. Anyway, I'll try to conclude in
half a minute.
We discuss issues on dialogue, where we talked about obstacles being misunderstood, misconceived, then possibilities wherein we are having a lot of promises for dialogue. We also discussed issues like history and memory, how wounded memory plays a role and being exploited by others, and we are perceived through filters of memory and sometimes misunderstood. Therefore, we need therapeutic dialogue. Misunderstanding of ignorance being festered, so that violence and other segregation communities is maintained. Mediatory role in peace building and reconciliation. Christianity has this potential to become a mediator between two communities which are at war or fighting, just like Muslims and Hindus in India. So therefore, to facilitate what is called inter-religious dialogue as conflict resolution.
Good. We'll have to stop it there.
And the last point, resisting the regime of body politics. Brutalized bodies have become sites from where the perpetrators are speaking. Bodies of women are steadily converted into boundaries or gatekeepers, like love jihad for the communities, or even the Brahminical caste that we find in India.
Good, thanks. Obviously, a really good discussion was had by these people earlier today, and I wish I'd been a part of that one too. But we'll have to go on, and next is Paul.
We had these two discussions in the education and research group, and the morning session, we had a very chaotic discussion, but we had an excellent. I'm not the secretary actually. Julius is the secretary, and he did a fantastic job of summarizing our discussion. One is about schools. Early missionaries did connect with the goal of educational upliftment in Asia. And I think Marshal Fernando gave a very nice account of that in Sri Lanka, and I think it's true in other Asian countries also. But the problem is that there has been a fall from this principle, at least in India, maybe elsewhere, towards the professionalism that is corrosive and capitalistic. Basically, what has happened is that there is such a demand for these institutions that they have become very commercial in their outlook, and also they are trying to meet a need which is there in the society. And it is not the service motive which the schools and colleges of an earlier generation had. So there's a tendency for many of these institutions to change in terms of their direction. Another very interesting point was made about research, especially by seminaries and theological schools, are taboos about what can be identified as an object of study, and a mention is made of witchcraft in Africa, and there was feeling that should not be studied. And there are many such taboos, things which are considered taboo in the culture, which people hesitate to look at because of the kind of reaction. So it's been necessary to be clear about these limits for effective education and research. Third is about pedagogy. Education has 4 pillars: learning to know, to be, to do, and live together. However, in Asia, the way it has emerged, or the banking system of education takes precedence, rote education has become a kind of negative legacy of colonialism that impedes meaning making. And of course, the question is, where did this rote education come from? Is it connected with Asian cultures, or is it some way in which the institutions which emerged in the colonial period propagated it? That is something which we are not very clear about. Why the system of education is less critical, analytical in many of our colleges and universities. And if that is so, how does education and research progress from there? So that was the first session. In the second session, we looked at the role of education and research to encourage social, economic, cultural upliftment through transformative knowledge. We felt that education and research ultimately has to lead to some sort of transformation of individuals and society, and that is the direction in which a Christian-inspired education has to move. And so challenge for Christian education is to determine how to be adaptive to the various social and cultural contexts in which this is applied, because the education cannot simply be transposed from Western universities into our societies without adapting them to the milieu in which they exist. Secondly, I think, as we discussed in the last session, interreligious approaches to education research, especially those that are sensitive to Asian traditions and values, can possibly enhance the capacity to facilitate this transformative knowledge. particularly among marginal ethnic and gender groups. And if we do not look at our own traditions and values, then the education may become very theoretical. It may not be so relevant to what is needed to transform our societies. And there are great benefits to fostering a value-added, holistic educational program in which young people are knowledgeable about religious diversity, which was mentioned in the last session, as a prerequisite to religious harmony. And that, as was mentioned, has to take place right from children, from childhood.
Paul, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. Third, the perception that mission schools offer a higher standard of education increase this persisting legacy of colonialism. But why is that so? There's an assumption that, a perception that is a value-based educational paradigm which offers better opportunities for upward social empowerment. Is there any substance to this? And what is the basis of this continuing legacy? So this is something which you need to look at in terms of research. Lastly, can education and research be the basis for the formation of new social movements? So we felt that there should be a sort of dialectical process also between social movements and education and research, as well as especially Christian education and research. So and we just discussed the Hong Kong protest also, incidentally, of the new social movements that are responsive to contemporary social realities. There remain some very real challenges to the capacity of Christians to use education as a platform. Are we supporting Christian education? Is it supporting social movements, or is it supporting the status quo of society? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. He was our moderator, so if I fail to convey what has happened in our group, then Richard is here to help me out. Our discussion was very dynamic, to say the least, and even heated at some point. So I'm very happy to report. And in the first discussion, our discussion is taking the view from this interfaith dialogue kind of thing and framework. So the questions that we raised in the first session is about the role of Christianity as a catalyst of change. And then there is the need to dialogue with other people, other religions for that matter. But we realize the complexity in Asia with regard to these questions. It is not easy to get everyone on board here. Myanmar, Burma, and also Sri Lanka were mentioned as a case in point, where the Buddhist majority, so to speak, or Buddhist institutions are very hard to join us for political reasons, for example. And so there is this need to change some of the strategies, but also the need for intra-faith dialogue later. But with regard to the change, let's say paradigm shift in our approach to religious questions or interfaith dialogue, our group has tended to discuss these common concerns, building up common concerns with different religious groups in the localities. For example, toward more humanity-oriented approach, but humanity here is not understood narrowly in the modern sense of being, isolated from the cosmos or from the community, but the cosmological aspect to it has to be defended. And cooperation between religions, for example, also learning from other religions. Cosmic religion can offer something that metacosmic religion is lacking probably here and there. So mutual learning on certain concrete project can be good based on the common concern for humanity, but understood as a integral part of the whole cosmology, not humanity understood in the Enlightenment period or high modernity, for that matter. And there's also the need to change the paradigm of interfaith dialogue. It has been discussed, I think, in different occasions. The need to go from or to move from the elitist circle of dialogues among academics, like what we are doing here probably, to more dialogue with the masses or among the people themselves, based on the social practice, for example. So we can understand why some people, the grassroots people, tend to become more fundamentalist in their worldview. For example, we can have some kind of dialogue with social scientists to understand the logic behind that kind of attitude. And then there's the need to be more conversant with our partners inside our churches. For example, within the Christian world, there are problems associated with differences in approach to missioning among different churches. So we realize that there's this need to come up with a better strategy to come together first or at the same time as a group. For example, with the agenda of forming or formulating, agreeing on this code of ethics with regard to missions, of doing missions, so that missioning doesn't hinder us from interacting with other religious traditions, but also interacting with each other within the Christian world. For example, there's also a call for a paradigm shift in understanding of mission. No longer mission is understood as converting peoples of other religious traditions, but as healing, as providing healing for individuals and the communities. Coming back to the mission of Jesus in the Gospels, I think. And that's the first session. The second session, I still have 2 minutes, roughly. My moderator is brutal. So, with time, it's good, Richard. The second discussion is about how we heal the negative perceptions among non-Christians of us, being Asian Christians with this kind of sense of authority or foreign connections and things like that. And we find that we should do something for our country, for example. Nation building can be a means in which we can come together with fellow, religionists, fellow citizens coming from different religious backgrounds to form this commonality, so that we are not perceived to be something foreign, menacing other, or what is your term, Richard? The repugnant minority.
The repugnant other.
Repugnant other, yeah. And Richard has these questions for us. How long does it take for a religion to be considered an indigenous entity? And we discuss different things, but it doesn't depend on the time, but rather it depends on what we are and what we do for the local communities through activities, whether we contribute to the well-being of the community through education and etc. But here there's a heated debate whether our education, Christian education, that has been identified in many Asian countries as a special contribution made by the church to the society, is really something worthy of defense, whether it is elitist and things like that.
You'll have to tie it up quickly.
And also whether we are absorbing local culture or we are still defending a theology of displacement among the people, becoming repugnant minority once again. Also, whether we have this kind of mentality of being a special kind of group in a special kind of place, refusing others, for example. And it's also a question of being a majority. Whether if you're a majority, then whether you're new or old in that place, you can become indigenous. So it's a politics to a certain degree. Thank you.
Understanding, I thought something which I had produced could be displayed, but obviously it's not. So the group 3B on dialogue, mutual understanding, the members of the group spoke from the context of India, obviously the majority, from Sri Lanka, Central Asia, the Philippines and Japan. And we were happy not to be only Christian, we had the Muslim and Hindu present. The discussion started from a story of an Indian theologian involved for many years in the dialogue with giants, who was told by the group, "You are such a good person, a pity that you don't belong to us." And this was repeated by other experiences, that very often these statements are repeated. You are a good person in spite of belonging to a certain religion. And we realized if there is an aim for dialogue, if we reach the state where we can say, you are a good person because you belong to a certain tradition. Then there was a general agreement among the Christian participants that in the past Christians were too keen to present their religion to the others in order that they would join. That has been repeated again and again, and I tried to mix the two discussions we had. It's much easier because this question came up again at the beginning of our second session, that it was stated there's a complete confusion on the relationship between dialogue and mission. That in several statements or very important statements by the Catholic Church, you find the statement like in Redemptor Missio, the mission encyclical of John Paul II, that dialogue has now become the new form of mission. And it was stated by many of the participants that statements like these confirm the suspicions many members of the other religious traditions have had when Christians all of a sudden, after Vatican II in the Catholic Church and after changes in the World Council of Churches, suddenly became advocates of dialogue, suspecting that having failed in proselytizing, now the Christians are using the tool of dialogue in order to convert. So there is a real need that we make clear the relationship between the two. It has to be clarified, and one approach could be to see the common thing in dialogue and mission is witness to the tradition you belong to. The difference is in the aim of witnessing, is the aim that you witness to the other in order that he accepts your tradition and converts. That would be the missionary approach, which still today can be valuable as part of the Christian tradition, but it should be made clear every time whether you are in a missionary enterprise or whether you are entering into dialogue, where again the witness would be that you, as a member of this group, as a Christian, would witness to your Christian tradition, but at the same time being open and ready to listen to the witness of the other present, and that it is clear that the aim of this kind of exchange is learning from another, a fusion of horizons, and not trying to convert.
2 minutes.
Okay. Then we were talking about what is the aim of dialogue. The dialogue is not a conservative principle, as Joseph Ratzinger has stated early on, but is accepting the other as the other, but in the process of dialogue, change will be brought about. Then we talked about Christianity as a minority, with a certain minority complex, full of sensitivity for the position of the majority, and it was stated the aim of dialogue could be to make this sensitivity as a challenge for the majority too. We were talking about reception of tradition of the others, like Christian Wayang in Indonesia, or Zen reception by Christians being a problem. And we ended on the question of, in the first and second session it was discussed, the effectiveness of dialogue. Is dialogue just something, a fabrication, an exercise for few specialists, or also for the grassroots? And it was pointed out that we levels in dialogue, and that in Asia, not only the specialists, and that was the answer to a certain effectiveness, the dialogue of life in Asia is still happening and is effective.
On pastoral and spiritual implications, for the first group time, I want to bring 5 important points. And the first one is very practical one, meaningful ritual celebrations. Just that ritual tradition does not broaden the sense of spirituality, but there is a need to integrate in the indigenous spiritual tradition. Not just the monastic way of celebration, but we need to understand the richness of local tradition. A community cannot just live an intra-community spirit, looking at its identity. Rather, it has to bring the original missionary spirit to transform the world, living the meaning of others' identity. Number 2, understanding the sense of spirituality. Spirituality should build the community and bring all people together. Spirituality is the respect for others. Spirituality is to bring all commonality of all traditions and being open to relatively. Number 3, understanding the meaning of indigenous. What is the real meaning of indigenous? 2 ways of understanding. First one is making Christianity into one's culture, that is called inculturation. Second one is understanding of the originality of the habits of people, understanding the life of tribals and native people and give them their right, not just give them the reservation. This political mind should be changed. Example, SCST in India is recognition of group of people in a protective measure and not giving them the real authority. Indigenous is local, tribal, native people who are in remote areas going through their own names, living a communitarian, religious and gathering together for the social culture and celebrating that social gathering in all situations. In this way, we need to recognize the indigenous people to have their own languages, culture as group and as community. The number 4, fullness of education ministry. Our Christianity is very well dedicated to the education ministry, but what we do? Revival of culture is a practical education, not just knowledge-oriented and westernized methodology. Education should value the importance of the living the community and should not devalue the human culture and values. Educational system should not focus on the sense of globalization, rather it should take one to participate in socio-cultural movements and make others to involve in it. Could we do through our Christian educational ministry? In practice, we also give a little more ideas. Everyone has to understand the real life of the other and should have the mind to learn from the other with respect. Ordinary people live a spirit of commonality in their everyday life, even without any theological mindset. This is very realistic life in public. So, the learned people could learn from these very ordinary people and do their mission. Solidarity with the young people. In Loyola College, they gave one good example. Our religious young people come together to live the real human spirit through peace rages. In youth, those who are living in University of Chennai, Madras, have their social network among themselves and attempt to learn and understand one another through an association called Shitpi. Self-identity is necessary and meaningful not only to work for the world and self-identity necessary and meaningful only to work for the world and its transformation. When we came in the second part of our group discussion and dialogue, the first thing we have set the context. Especially with the sharing of Dr. Wesley, we have come to understand some suspicion or misconception about the Christianity is to be cleared out. Like Jesus' teaching versus Christianity, intolerance in Christianity, foreignness, and anti-pluralistic society. So what to do now to have a proper dialogue? First one, can we argue through our life witnesses? Second one, youth programs, bringing young people together for interaction. They live and work together. So it is not a big problem for the ordinary youth to understand the religious mind. The third one, Buddhists, even the communists, accept the Christians through St. Francis of Assisi's prayer. This is a very well lived example in Vietnam. So look at the commonality between religious and even with the communists and do the needful to the humanity. It is not the question of converting the people just through our words, but we have to live together and work together. The fourth one, even the religious people have to change our perception on certain ways of living and ideas. For example, from the individualism to pluralism, from exclusivism to inclusivism. No, just over, yeah.
Okay, you have
number
to
5, training of Sunday school teachers to have an open mind. The 6th one, a paradigm shift in a theological perception. The 7th one, teach and facilitate the lay people and make them to work together. The 8th one, it is not to be content with the theological ideas, but also become to the practical one. Is it possible to have an open mind to learn about the richness of one's own religious tradition and also the other? We need to, the 10th one, the last one, we need to meet and dialogue with a small group of fundamentalists in every religion, in Christianity, charismatic people, or in Hinduism also. There is a small group of fundamentalist people. We should have open mind to have the dialogue with them. Thank you so much.